Well, the calendar has officially turned to October, which means the looming tip to the 2024-2025 NBA season is also right around the corner. And for a league in the NBA that used to be ruled at the top year in and year out by roughly 2 to 3 teams for, roughly the last 40 years, the NBA has become quite the parity-driven entity as of late. But the NBA, at its very roots, always has been a dynastic league, with the annals of its history littered with a series of dominant multi-year championship runs. It was the George Mikan Minneapolis Lakers in the 50s, giving way to the greatest dynasty of them all, the 1960s Boston Celtics. Then, beginning in 1987, when the Magic and Kareem Lakers defeated the Celtics in the finals, and running all the way through the year 2002, when the Kobe and Shaq Lakers beat the Nets to capture their third consecutive NBA crown, only one single year in that entire 15-season span featured an individual champion that did not win at least back-to-back titles. Then, of course, the 2010s were largely dominated by two alleged all-time greats engaging in a series of super team one-upsmanship, with LeBron James and Steph Curry combining to win 6 of 7 championships during that decade. But since the Steph Curry-Kevin Durant Warriors hoisted the Larry O'Brien in 2018, there hasn't been a single title defense in what has now been 6 years and counting. But at the very top of the heap of hopeful 2025 championship contenders is a team that Vegas thinks will finally end that streak, with the Boston Celtics constituting overwhelming and substantial title favorites to begin the regular season, and hell, why wouldn't they be? A team so impossibly loaded that the perennial first-team All-NBA selection Jason Tatum didn't even win the Eastern Conference Finals or NBA Finals MVP award. Now that would be his superstar running mate Jaylen Brown. Then, of course, there is the unicorn, Kristaps Porzingis, who as the third option last season in Boston averaged 20 points per game on 52% shooting. Oh, and then ho-hum Derek White as the team's fourth option, I guess, who averaged nearly 17 points per game on 40% shooting from 3 in the playoffs. And why my hesitancy to call him the team's fourth option is because their fifth leading scorer last year was Drew Holiday. And the last we saw him prior to the 2023-2024 season with the Celtics, he was the second option for Giannis Antetokounmpo on the Milwaukee Bucks, a team that had the best record in the league during the 2022-23 season. This Celtics team is absolutely stacked and deserves every bit the moniker of title favorites. But do they have what it takes to end this streak of teams failing to defend their titles? For a team that has had its share of high-profile choke jobs until last season, they should be seen as far from a lock, especially with the immense heaping loads of luck they got on their way through the playoffs last season, with virtually every top-tier contender in their conference succumbing to some untimely injury or injuries. A trio of such teams finds themselves atop the heap of title contenders in the East, just behind the Celtics, headlined by a couple of former league MVPs, both of which were injured during the playoffs a year ago. First, of course, we have Giannis Antetokounmpo, who missed the entire first-round loss to the Pacers with an injury and looks to be in a make-or-break year with Damian Lillard. Of course, Joel Embiid was also severely hampered with injuries in the 76ers' first-round playoff loss to the New York Knicks. The 76ers, of course, who went big game fishing this summer and reeled in the top free agent prospect in Paul George to amass what looks to be perhaps one of the few remaining big threes in the modern day NBA. And speaking of those Knicks and injuries, they will look to have a healthy OG Anunoby, Josh Hart, and Jalen Brunson in the mix after all three were negatively impacted by injuries throughout their second round Game 7 ousting at the hands of the Indiana Pacers. Joining the party in Gotham City this season will be newly acquired Mikal Bridges, who comes over from Brooklyn, and of course, even more freshly acquired Karl Anthony Towns, who was acquired from the Minnesota Timberwolves for Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo. And of course, speaking of that trade with Minnesota, the Timberwolves check in as a second-tier co-betting favorite with the Dallas Mavericks out in the Western Conference. The Wolves, of course, were Western Conference finalists a season ago as they parted ways with the often disappointing perennial all-star in Karl Anthony Towns for another guy who never quite lived up to expectations in New York with Julius Randle. But the Timberwolves do also welcome DiVincenzo to town, who will add additional defensive depth in their backcourt along with elite three-point shooting. In addition to that, Minnesota also fleeced the Spurs out of the 8th pick in the NBA draft in Rob Dillingham, who will look to be an immediate impact player in this rotation. Yes, the Timberwolves were busy this offseason, but their moves don't quite move the needle as much as the eventual Western Conference champion Dallas Mavericks, who of course signed 5-time All-Star Klay Thompson away from Golden State, but they also made several other sneaky key additions which have significantly upgraded that roster, including Spencer Dinwiddie and Quentin Grimes. The Warriors, meanwhile, though, who lose Klay, did virtually nothing else in terms of surrounding their aging superstar Steph Curry with anything of note. The only other franchise which has been more neglectful of their stars' needs as of late is, well, the reigning MVPs, but we'll get into them in a moment. The Warriors, in lieu of making any offseason acquisitions, are long shots to win the title this year, and I do mean long. Their current plus 4,000 odds to hoist the Larry-O B at season's end is currently less than the Memphis Grizzlies and Cleveland Cavaliers. While at the other end of the spectrum, an organization that bends over backwards to accommodate its aging prima donna, the LA Lakers, who have done everything they can to throw viable title contending pieces around their narcissistic, deluded, soon-to-be 40-year-old fake GOAT, LeBron James. Yet somehow, some way, the Lakers are still also just plus 4,000 right beside the Golden State Warriors. Must be the fact they were forced to draft the 250th best collegiate prospect at 55 overall this summer, hired a podcaster with zero coaching experience at any level, and has a best player with a penchant for diarrheaing all over the court in big playoff games. But speaking of old and nearly washed up players desperately clinging to some remote shot at competing, Kevin Durant and the Phoenix Suns, who will run it back.
Run it back! Run it back!
With virtually the same exact roster that got swept in the first round of the playoffs a year ago. And that brings us to a team that would have been lucky to just run it back, the Denver Nuggets, who lose starter Kentavious Caldwell-Pope to Orlando this offseason and do absolutely nothing to replace him, instead opting to elevate Christian Braun into the starting lineup to go along with Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon, and of course Jamal Murray, who is fresh off of his absolutely reprehensible Olympic performance where he averaged 6 points per game on 29% shooting from the field and 14% from three to generate a net minus 23 in 4 games. And that sounds a hell of a lot like his 2024 NBA playoff performances. These four constitute what has to be considered an absolutely middling to below average starting NBA lineup, while the bench looks even more laughable, with the big offseason acquisition there being the corpse of Russell Westbrook, coming off of career lows in points and assists last year in LA as he sets to turn 36 in 2 months. And yeah, that smells like a team that shouldn't even be remotely near the playoffs. But luckily, 3-time league MVP Nikola Jokic will somehow drag that dumpster fire to 50+ wins. No doubt, though, the cream of the crop in the West is none other than, well, the team that had the West's #1 seed a year ago and substantially improved their roster this offseason, the Oklahoma City Thunder, of course. The Thunder, who finished second league-wide in net differential last year behind only the eventual champion Boston Celtics, added Isaiah Hartenstein and defensive stalwart Alex Caruso this offseason. A terrifying prospect for a team that was 4th a year ago in net defensive rating, and what we should see out of the Thunder this season is likely the best defensive team since the 2008 Boston Celtics. This team is young, emergent, and looking every bit the odds-on favorite to win the West that Vegas speculates them to be as we near the opening tip. In fact, in a lot of ways, this team resembles the Celtics team that won it all last year, except they are better coached, and at the head of that snake is a far more capable closer in the clutch time than the Celtics have. So actually, in looking at the field of contenders, perhaps that streak of teams failing to defend a title actually will continue for at least one more year.